press the recording button. Okay, let's get going. Welcome, everybody. My name is Zela Astarjian, and I'm VP of the AIWA Central Board, and I'm your webinar host today. I welcome you to another one of AIWA's virtual events together with our partner organization, the Women's Support Center. Today, we have an open conversation about domestic violence in Armenia with Maro Matosyan and Ani Gelosian from the Women's Support Center and Hasmik Khachatryan, whose groundbreaking case at the European Court of Human Rights highlights the urgent need to address domestic violence in Armenia. We will discuss Hasmik's journey from the domestic violence survivor to passionate advocate for reform. Today's format is conversational, and there's going to be time for Q&A, so please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A feature on your screen. The audience is muted, and we are also going to do translations today from Armenian to English. We also have a survey at the end of this program, so please take a quick minute to let us know what future topics you want us to cover here at AIWA. Before we get into the discourse, I want to remind you about AIWA's mission and the 3 pillars we're currently focusing on. Our mission is simple. It is to connect and elevate Armenian women globally. I'm going to ask you also to please type in the chat box at the bottom of your screen the city, state, country you are joining from today. As to how we elevate Armenian women, we do that through 3 strategic focus areas. Number 1 is health and wellness, supporting a woman's right and power to be aware, in control of her mental, physical, emotional well-being. Domestic violence comes under this pillar, and today's webinar obviously falls into this pillar. Number 2, it's education. We give thousands of dollars in scholarships every year. And number 3, the third area of focus for us is economic empowerment. At this point, let me introduce you to our panelists. Ani Gelosian is a dedicated women's rights advocate and the Director of Development at the Women's Support Center. Mari Matosyan is the founder and executive director of the Women's Support Center, bringing decades of experience in nonprofit management and domestic violence programming. And last but not least, Hasmik Khachatryan is a domestic violence survivor, entrepreneur, and passionate advocate for reform. At this point, I want to give this to the Women's Support Center. Maro and Ani, take it away.
Thank you so much, Zela, and thank you to AIWA for not only organizing this webinar, but really coming to us with enthusiasm about initiating it. AIWA has been one of our founding supporters, has really been by our side since day one, and we're really truly thankful for your enthusiastic response and your desire to support women and girls in Armenia. Before turning over to Maro, I wanted to briefly talk about the Women's Support Center for those of you who may not be familiar with our work. So the Women's Support Center is the premier domestic violence center in Armenia, and we're by far the largest in scope in offering domestic violence services, and we're also the most professionalized in this field. We've been operating since 2010 and primarily in 3 areas. So first and foremost, we provide essential and life-saving services to women and their children who are victims of domestic violence. This includes everything from counseling to legal aid to therapy and emergency safe shelter and also transitional shelter for women and their children. And beyond these services, we also have a range of educational and professional skills building opportunities for the women who come through our doors, so they can take part in various workshops on domestic violence, on safety planning, on parental skills, and they also have the opportunity through our programs to receive vocational training, and if funding is available, to receive seed money for their own professional small businesses. So this is all we do on the service end, but we do a lot more than that, because from the very beginning, we understood that simply providing domestic violence services to survivors wasn't enough to really change the situation for women in the country. So that's why we're really very active in campaigning and raising awareness about domestic violence in the public. And this has had a tremendous impact over the years, because when we started this work in 2010, domestic violence was essentially a silent crime. And people didn't understand or were willing to admit that domestic violence was widespread in Armenian society. We've gotten to the point now in 2025 where there's been a real reckoning with the fact that domestic violence exists. And now more than ever before, people are willing to talk about it and people are willing to address it. So this is a really tremendous impact that we've seen, that's been a direct relation of the indirect relationship to the work that we've really been doing over the years to improve knowledge and attitudes around domestic violence. And then the third area in which we work is in institutional reform. So we were very active in helping pass the domestic violence law in 2017. And we've had a tremendous role in shaping domestic violence legislation since then. And we had a sort of landmark overhaul of the domestic violence law, which we spearheaded. It was our amendments to the law that in large part were adopted by Parliament and now are put into force. So, and beyond the law, we've also been very involved in professional training of police, of investigators, of social workers, psychologists, and others who are frontline workers in this field. And again, here we've seen really a tremendous change over the years, where in the early years, we had almost no police response. They had really nothing in place to help victims, and they weren't sensitized at all. And now we're getting the majority of our high-risk cases being reported to us by the police. So that has in and of itself been just a tremendous change over the years. And then finally, I wanted to briefly mention that the Women's Support Center has taken a leading role in helping to establish domestic violence support centers in every region of the country. So now we have 10 centers in our regions, 11 if you're including Yerevan, and all of our centers work off of all of the standards that we in Yerevan have put into place. So all of our forms, all of our procedures, all of our database, everything has been standardized. And now we have a really unified approach to addressing domestic violence throughout the country and really reaching women in even some of the most rural and remote parts of the country. So that in a nutshell is what we have done and what we're all about. And I'll pass along now to Maro to talk more about Hasmik's case and really the significance of this ECHR case.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you. This is really a tour de force in 3 minutes, summarizing the work of 15 years, really. Hi, everyone. I just want to put this into the context a little bit, because our viewers in the United States, they might not be familiar very much about the European Court of Human Rights, which is the landmark decision that we're going to discuss today, and what it is and why is it important. So I would like to give you a little bit of a background information about that. The European Court of Human Rights was created in 1959, but it came in full activity in 1998, and that was not by chance, because really in the 90s, as you know, communism fell, Soviet Union fell also, and there were a lot of states where legal institutions, institutions in general, there were many human rights violations. These countries also, like Armenia, signed conventions with the Council of Europe, of which European Court of Human Rights is a part of. I'm happy to inform you that just a few days ago, our Armenia's human rights lawyer, Vahe Grigorian, was elected at the European Court of Human Rights, which is a really an amazing accomplishment for Armenia and an honor for Armenia. So this body protects human rights, enforcing the European Convention on Human Rights, of which Armenia is a signatory, as I mentioned. it makes governments accountable and obliged to adhere to the principles of the convention. And access to justice is another important element the court looks into, especially for individuals who were denied justice in their national courts. Now, in order to apply to the court, you have to go through all the appeals and instances of national courts, and which it's a long process, sometimes takes 2 or 3 years, like in Hasmik's case. And unfortunately, the European Court of Human Rights it takes for it to make a decision, it took 10 years, and usually that's the case. So then it gives especially importance on cases of domestic violence, which are marred by bias and an ineffective justice system. All these are exemplified in Hasmik's case. Promoting the rule of law implies a fair trial and a due process, and so forth. So these are all parts that were taken into consideration when they were examining Hasmik's case. Finally, the European Court of Human Rights recognized that the abuse Hasmik suffered is a violation of Article 3 of the Convention, which prohibits inhuman and degrading treatment. It also critiqued the inadequate state response, which did not conduct effective investigation. Here, I pause to remember how ineffective the investigation was. Hasmik was living with her mother-in-law, who was a famous fortune teller, who served the nomenclatura and had a lot of clout. And I remember at one point when the police had to enter the household to detain the abuser, the police refused. The Kavar, in Kavar this happens. The police refused because they were afraid of the fortune teller's evil eye. So you can imagine to what extent the response was so inadequate. Also, the ruling cited the shortcomings of the legislation. Now we're talking, this is in 2012, when we did not have a domestic violence law at the time, and a system failure to apply punishment for all forms of domestic violence. The court also stressed the right of the victim to compensation, and therefore the Armenian government now is obliged to pay Hasmik 24,000 euros for the damage she incurred. This is the first such ruling in Armenia for a domestic violence case. There were other rulings. For example, the illegal and forceful displacement of people from their properties on Northern Boulevard when they were constructing the Northern Boulevard. And there were several such court decisions in those cases. But this is the first domestic violence case that the European Court addressed for Armenia. And setting a precedent for future cases that the state is responsible for effective legislature to protect victims and to make perpetrators accountable. Now, the reason this is so important is because it's an advocacy tool for us, that the history does not repeat itself. So it always, we can remind authorities that legislation is not in order with international standards, that procedures are not they were not adequate, and protection of the victim most of all. So I want to say that, as Ani mentioned, our work is not just what the center does, but we really, and this decision by the European Court, it's another example of how we want to change at institutional level how Armenia addresses domestic violence. Because let's say in 20 years, in 10 years, the NGO is not there anymore. We want to make sure that the Armenia at institutional level addresses response to domestic violence in a proper way, protecting victims against abuse. And now I'll give my voice to Hasmik.
Հասմիկ ջան, մարոն վերջացրել է արդեն, կարող եք խոսել։
Բարև ձեզ, շնորհակալ եմ բոլորիցդ, ողջունում եմ բոլորիդ։
Hi, greetings. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Երևի թե սկսեմ սկզբից, որ արդեն 12 տարի է ինչ որ դուրս եմ եկել ընտանեկան բռնությունից ու դուրս գալս պարզապես փախոստ է եղել, փախել եմ գիշերով տանից, հերթական ծեծից հետո ամուսնուս, առանց երեխաներիս, գիշերով ու միակ նպատակս նա էր, որ ես ուղղակի գնամ մոլորակից կորեմ, մենակ թե նախկին ամուսինս ինձ այդ ժամանակ չբռնի, չծեծի ու ես կարողանամ կյանքս փրկել։
I will probably start from the very beginning. It's been already 12 years since I fled home, and I escaped in the middle of the night after another beating from my husband, leaving my kids there, and I just left without anything. At that very moment, I had only one idea. I wanted to vanish, disappear from the world as long as I never encountered my husband again, because I was sure that if he found me, he was going to kill me for sure.
Ոնց Մարոն ասեց, իրենք համ շատ փող ունեին, ծանոթ ունեին շատ մեծ, կեսօրս էր հայտնի մարդ, ու ես անկարող էի ամեն ինչից։ Քանի դեռ երբ որ հանդիպեցի արդեն կանանց աջակցման կենտրոնի աջակցությանը, իրենք ինձ աջակցեցին, իմ համար երբ որ այն ժամանակ վախենում էի, որ չպայքարեմ, չէի կարողանում ինչ-որ մի բան որոշել, կանանց աջակցման կենտրոնի շնորհիվ ես կարողացա այդ ամբողջ վախերիս ու փախուստիս փոխարեն փորձել պայքարել, քանի որ իմ երեխաներն էին մնացել այդ բռնության մեջ ու չէի կարող երեխաներիս թողել այնտեղ ու կյանքիս վտանգ էր սպառնում, թեկուզ եւ ամուսնուցս ես փախել էի։
As Mara mentioned, my at that time family, my husband, they had money and they had powerful connections, but everything changed when I met Women's Support Center, and my idea to hide and vanish transferred to a determination to fight. But my kids were still there in that abusive situation, and I needed to fight for them and trying to get back.
Ու ասեմ հիմա իմ երեխաները իմ հետ են, էլի կանանց աջակցման կենտրոնի շնորհիվ երկար դժվար ծանր պայքարից հետո կարողացանք երեխաներիս վերցնել էլի նորից, քանի որ պետական մարմինները ոչ մի բան չէին անում։
Now I would like to say that my kids are now with me after a long struggle, again with the help of Women's Support Center, because state agencies and state bodies did absolutely nothing.
Ու երևի թե խոսեմ կանանց աջակցման կենտրոնի աջակցության մասին, որ իրանք ինչքանով կարողացան հասցնել այս վիճակին, քանի որ հիմա ես կայացել եմ, հիմա ես ինքնուրույն եմ, հիմա ես ապահով եմ, իմ համար
Now I'd like to talk about Women's Support Center and its role it had played in my life, and the support I have received from them, and about also the situation, the way that I feel now, secure and safe with the help of Women's Support Center.
Իմ համար այդ ժամանակ ամենակարևոր ու առաջնայինը ապաստարանի ապահովություններ, որ ես կարողացա ֆիզիկապես եւ հոգեպես ինձ ապահով զգալ,
At that time, the first and foremost important thing for me was to get shelter, with the help of which, when I received it, I started feeling emotional and physically secure.
Երկրորդը վստահությունն էր, որ գիտեի երբեք իմ շահերը չեն ոտնահարելու ու ինձ են պաշտպանելու ու երբեք իմ շահերը ինչ որ մի գումարի կամ ծանոթի դիմաց չեն ոտնահարելու.
The second most important thing was the trust that my rights would be protected, that my rights were not going to be violated, and no any other connection or power would play a role here. So they were the ones that they were going to protect me.
Ու իմ համար ամենակարևոր բանն էլ նա էր, որ ես ֆինանսապես այդ ժամանակ չէի կարող իրավաբանի, հոգեբանի ծառայությունից օգտվել, քանի որ դժվար էր։ Իհարկե երկար տարիներ իմ հետ եւ իրավաբանը եւ հոգեբանը աշխատել են, ու նաեւ հասկացա, որ շատ քիչ են վերապատրաստված իրավաբաններ ու հոգեբաններ, որ կկարողանային իմ գործը այդ ժամանակ, քանի դեռ չկար ընտանեկան բռնության գաղափար, կկարողանան ճիշտ գրագետ ներկայացնել բոլոր կառույցներում, որ ես կարողանամ իմ իրավունքները պաշտպանել։
And the most important thing for me was that I financially couldn't afford actually having professional consultancy like lawyer getting support or consultancy from lawyer and psychology. And for years, of course, women's support centers, lawyer and psychologists worked with me. And even if I could, I knew that not all professionals were trained outside of Women's Support Center, were trained thematically to understand domestic violence, since domestic violence at that time wasn't considered as a big issue in Armenia, and even the concept of domestic violence wasn't generated at the time in Armenia.
Ու ասեմ, որ երկար ճանապարհ մենք անցանք կանանց աջակցման կենտրոնի հետ, հիմա խոսեմ ոստիկանության վերաբերմունքից, որ իրենք շատ ընդհանրապես մեզ չէին պաշտպանում ու ընդհանրապես մեր կողքը չէին կանգնում, քանի որ ոստիկանությունից, դատարաններից, բոլոր դատական ատյաններից իրենք մեզ, երբ որ նախկին ամուսնուս կողմից մեզ ճնշում էին, մեզ սպառնում էին, մեզ վիրավորում էին, իրենք ոչինչ չէին անում, ու բոլոր դատարաններում իրանք վերագրում էին դա պարզապես ծեծ, այլ ոչ թե ընտանեկան բռնության դեպք, որը որ ավելի ծանր պիտի լիներ այդ նախկին ամուսնուս համար։ Պարզապես բոլոր ոստիկանները ուզում էին, որ այդ գործը կարճվեր ու նախկին ամուսինս չձերբակալվեր։
So I would also like to present you a long path that we went with Women's Support Center, and also to present the way police worked, or actually didn't work at all. So the police and other state bodies like the court, they didn't stand with us. Even the pressures I was getting from my husband and his family, that all was labeled as a domestic issue and not as a domestic violence, whereas it was a domestic violence case. And the punishment should have been severe if it was considered a domestic violence.
Ասեմ, որ չեմ կարող կոնկրետ ժամանակ հիշել, բայց համարյա 3 տարի եւ երեխաներիս դատական խնամակալության հարցով եւ քրեական գործով համարյա 3 տարի քրեական գործ գնաց, ու մենք անընդհատ պայքարում էինք, անընդհատ այդ անարդարությունից հուսահատվում էինք, բայց ասեմ, որ ես կարողացա այդ ընթացքում վերականգնվել, կարողացա ինքնագնահատականս բարձրացնել, կարողացա պայքարել, սովորեցի պայքարել, առաջ գնալ, կարողացա չնայած որ ամուսնուս չձերբակալեցին մինչև վճռաբեկ դատարանում, իմ գործով ազատ արձակեցին, բայց իմ մեջ այդ ուժեղ կնոջ, ուժեղ մարդու տեսակը այդ պայքարի, որ հասկացա, որ հետս մարդ կա, ես կկարողանամ իմ շահերը պաշտպանել, որ ես ճիշտ բան եմ անում, երևի թե այդ ընթացքը շատ կարևոր է։
So probably it was 3 years that we fought as a criminal case at the court related to my kids' case and kids' issues. and we all at the time were helpless during the time. But at the same time, during the whole period, I learned fighting. I learned who I am. I learned to stand on my feet. Though my husband wasn't arrested and he was set free at the Supreme Court, but at the same time understood that I'm a strong woman and I need to fight. And I started getting to know myself, who I am.
If I can, remembering those days, I should add that Hasmik came to our center really in a shell shock situation, and with very low self-esteem, no self-confidence in herself. And during this process, she became a very empowered person, to the point that when the domestic violence law was to be adopted, Hasmik stood alone in front of the parliament to speak and defend the need for a domestic violence law. So the trajectory of her empowerment was phenomenal.
Հասմիկ ջան, ձեզ համար այս մասը թարգմանեմ։ Հիշում եմ այն ժամանակ, երբ որ Հասմիկը եկավ մեզ մոտ գրասենյակ, ինչ վիճակում էր ընդհանրապես եւ հույսը կորցրած, բայց միևնույն ժամանակ մենք կարող ենք բոլորս փաստել, տեսնել, թե ինչպիսի նաեւ ինքնություն ինքը եւ ուժեղություն ձեռք բերեց այդ ընթացքում, եւ այն պահին, երբ որ ընտանեկան բռնության օրենքներ քննարկվում, Հասմիկը ազգային ժողովում ելույթ ունեցավ եւ կարեւորություն նշեց, թե ինչքան կարեւոր ընտանեկան բռնության օրենքի մասին օրենքը ունենալը Հայաստանում։
Հիմա քանի որ ժամանակը շատ քիչ է իմ խոսելու, բայց շատ երկար ու ամեն օրը, ամեն մի չնչին պահերը ինձ ուժեղացրեցին, ինձ առաջ տարան ու կանանց երևի թե ոգեշնչելու տարբերակ եղավ։
Since the time is really limited now, but once again, I would like to emphasize that every single second, every single minute made me stronger. And probably that also gave a hope to other women and kind of like an example for other women who are in a similar situation.
Hasmik, I like to point out an incident to tell you, to exemplify the long struggle in Hasmik's case. In the last incident of the abuse, the husband wanted to extinguish the cigarette in her eye. So obviously Hasmik put her hand up, and the cigarette was marks were on her, the burns were on her arm. When she went to the forensic examination, they gave the report that yes, those marks were marks of a burnt of burns on her arm of the cigarette. And yet during the trial, they were denied, saying that they were boils. There were signs of boils, of not at burns. So they contradicted the forensic examination. These are huge violations. And this is to give you an example of all the things that we had to go through. And in the end, nothing, and the husband really attacked her even during the court. We were going there with supporters to support Hasmik during the court proceedings. It was a big public hearing. It was the first case or the second case of a public case for Armenia, and that was very much followed in the media. So during the court sessions, the husband said that, well, what do you expect from a village woman that goes into a city? Obviously, she's going to become a sex worker. But Hasmik got up and she said that I am a working woman. I have my own business. She was doing baking goods, and I can take care of my children with my own income. And this was really a moment of empowerment for her, and a demonstration that she's not intimidated anymore by the abuser. Sorry.
Այսպասիվս Հասմիկ ջան, ձեզ համար թարգմանեմ, միջադեպը եմ ուզում ներկայացնել, միջադեպը կախված էր Հասմիկի նախկին ամուսնու հետ կապված եւ վերջինս փորձել էր սիգարետը հանգցնել աչքի մեջ, բայց դրա փոխարեն, որ Հասմիկը փորձել էր պաշտպանվել, այդ սիգարետը ձեռքին էր կպել եւ իհարկե այդ տեղերը մնացել էին թեև դատաբժշկական փորձաքննությունը փաստում էր, որ դրանք այո սիգարետի հետքեր են, այնուամենայնիվ դատարանում դա պատտվեց եւ ներկայացվեց, որ իբրև երևի երման ինչ-որ մի բանի արդյունքում դրանք ուղղակի հետքեր են մնացել։ Սա ուղղակի հերթական ցույց է, ուզում ենք ցույց տալ կամ ուզում եմ նշել, որ սա թե ինչպիսի տեսակի ոտնահարումներ կարող են լինել հենց անգամ դատարանում։ Նաեւ եղել են դեպք, որ դատարանում նա հարձակվել է հենց Հասմիկի վրա, գործը հանրային էր քննվում, մեդիայի ուշադրության կենտրոնում էր եւ մի դեպք էլ պատմեմ, երբ որ դատարանում հնչեցվեց, որ ահա գյուղից աղջիկը եկել է քաղաք եւ ինչով պետք է զբաղվի, իհարկե սեքս աշխատանքով պետք է զբաղվի, այդ զորեղացման պահը ապրեց Հասմիկը, ոտքի կանգնեց եւ ասաց, որ ինքը աշխատող է, ինքը կարող է իր երեխաներին հենց ինքը պահել եւ ահա այս պահն էլի կարեւոր պահերից մեկն էր, որ Հասմիկը նաեւ այդ զորեղացման պահը ինքը ապրեց եւ զգաց եւ արտահայտեց։ Եվ քեզ շատ ուժ տվող եւ շնորհակալություն հայտնող եւ ողջավորող հրախուսող ուղերձներ են ուղղում նաեւ մեր մասնակիցները Հասմիկ ջան, որ կարող ես տեսնել չաթում, ես ընթացքում քեզ համար դրանք նաեւ թայպ կանեմ հրախուսող։
Մի հատ էլ ասեմ, եթե երկու վայրկյան եւս եվրոպական Եվրոպական դատարանի որոշման մասին երկու բառ խոսեմ, որը ինձ շատ ոգևորեց, որը իմ բոլոր այդ ամբողջ անարդար դատարանների վերջում կարծես թե փակեց անարդարությունը, փակեց այդ ցավը, որ անարդարության դեմ ես պայքարում էի ու արդարություն չէի գտնում։ Հա, Եվրոպական դատարանը որոշում կայացրեց իօքոտ ինձ ու դա իմ համար շատ եւ հոգեպես եւ հիմա ֆինանսապես իմ համար շատ կարեւոր է։ Նաեւ կարեւոր է, որ հետագայում կանանց համար ոգեշնչող բան լինի։ Դժվար էր, երկար էր իհարկե պայքարը, բայց կարողացանք հաղթանակ ունենալ, կարողացանք մեծ հաղթանակ ունենալ, որին էլի նորից չէի հավատում։
A few words about the European Court of Human Rights decision and ruling that I finally, and at that time, I finally felt like my fight for justice has reached a conclusion. My struggle ended in victory, and it seems that it closed, European Courts of Human Rights decision closed the injustice that I faced. And that decision is very important for me, both financially and psychologically. And I believe that it's also important for other women to see that there is a hope, and one day we will have and we will meet the justice. Yes, the path was very long, but at the same time, it was worth. And other women also need to see this, that there is a hope. And that will serve as an example for them too.
We have a few questions. I don't know if there's any other comments, Maro, from anyone else, or should we get into the questions, or it's too early?
Արդյոք հարցեր, Հասմիկ ջան, ուղղված քեզ, թե նաև կոմենտներ, հիմա կտեսնենք, ես ընթացքում համապատասխանաբար կթարգմանեմ, եթե քեզ ուղղված որևէ բան լինի։
Yeah, Zella, I think we can go to some questions because I think they're piling up.
Yeah, they're piling up. So the first question, and thank you for MJ very patiently asking this question, how is it different in the Marzes versus Yerevan? Do women report such cases? Question mark. I've read that most don't even recognize that an abuse is happening since it's so common there, and most centers are in Yerevan.
Well, let me answer that and say that there's a big difference before 2018 and after 2018. 2018, there were in each Mars, as Annie mentioned, support centers created that we trained and we prepared, and they follow the same methodology as us. By law now, the police is mandated to refer cases to us for shelter or to the local support center in the Mars. Yes, women are still very much, even though a lot of awareness raising has been done and media is covering now cases of domestic violence. However, like in many countries, the fear of the abuser that they might kill them, really, literally, and also the fear of the unknown, of uncertainty in what will happen if they leave the abusive relationship. Many of them, they don't take a step to come out of this relationship unless it is very dangerous. It becomes very dangerous. However, every year we notice at all centers in Armenia a spike in the number of cases that they serve every year.
If I may add to what Maro just said, when all of the services were centralized in Yerevan, and that was the case for many years, we were getting cases from the regions, and we could see in our database how many cases were coming from which region. We had very few cases, for instance, from Lori and others. And so the assumption was that perhaps domestic violence could be less prevalent in some regions versus the others. But in fact, once the domestic violence regional support centers opened their doors in their local communities, like Maro said, reporting increased really tremendously. And every one of those centers has between 100 to 300 new cases every year of women and children who need their support. And we in Yerevan alone have about a 20% uptick in our case numbers every single year. So where we had around 650 in 2020, that's doubled now. Last year, we had over 1,200 women and children who came to us for support. And if the numbers and if the trends continue the way they are now, we can expect, by the end of this year, 1,400. So that just goes to show the need. And the same thing is happening in the regions. Their numbers are increasing, and they're just getting so much more reporting. Some of this is just more awareness in their communities, because the local centers are also going into their communities and doing awareness raising campaigns and educational seminars. They're going and knocking on the door of the municipality and giving their banners and this and the other. But it's also, I think, a reflection of the fact that there's a willingness, a growing willingness among women to reach out for support. It's becoming less and less taboo. And to that point, we're noticing that we're getting more reported cases of sexual violence within the context of domestic violence, which again was something that was so taboo years ago, no one spoke about. Now, even in the regions, there's a growing number of those cases being reported. So yeah, just to summarize, it's really something that we're seeing everywhere across the country, and every year more and more.
Wow, that's wonderful to hear. Thank you for all your great work, and thank you, Hasmik, and Maro and Ani. Anyway, next question is for Hasmik. Your story is very inspiring. How has this experience changed your children? What has been the impact, and how has the experience changed the way you are raising your children?
Հասմիկ ջան, հաջորդ հարցը ուղղված է ձեզ։ Գրում են, որ ձեր պատմությունը շատ ոգևորող է, եւ ուզում են ձեզ հարցնել, թե ձեր փորձառությունը ինչպես է փոխել ձեր երեխաներին, որն է եղել ազդեցությունը եւ ինչպես է ձեր փորձառությունը փոխել նաեւ այն ձևը, որով դուք նրանց մեծացնում եք, դասիրակում եք։
Իմ փորձառությունը շատ է փոխել, ամենաառաջինը փոխեց իմ աղջկա կյանքը, քանի որ աղջիկս թերի լսող է, ու մենք գյուղում էինք ապրում, ու իրեն ոչ միտեղ չէի կարողանում դասի տանել, վերապատրաստման տանել, որ ինքը կարողանա լսի, սարք դնի, քանի որ չէին թողում սարք դնել, ու ասում էին, որ դա ամոթ է, ու ինձ տանից հնարավորություն չկար դուրս գալու, որ ես գնամ իմ երեխայի հետ հիվանդանոց կամ ինչ-որ աջակցման կենտրոն, որտեղ իրենք կկարողանան չլսող երեխային ժեստերով դպրոց տանել կամ ինչ-որ բան։ Դա եղավ իմ աղջկա համար փոփոխություն, որ ես կարողացա ֆինանսով աշխատել իմ երեխային պահել, ընդունել դպրոց, հատուկ դպրոց, եւ իհարկե բռնությունից դուրս հանգիստ առանց վախի ապրելու։
So it changed my life completely and very, very much. Particularly, it influenced my daughter. We lived in a village, and she had hearing problems. She couldn't hear completely, and that was considered to be a shame in a family. And they didn't allow her to get any training and the necessary support. But once I got out of this abusive relationship and I became financially independent, I could already help my kid completely. I started becoming financially independent, and she had an opportunity and she started attending special school, and she started getting the support she needed.
Ու ասեմ, որ ամուսնուս մայրը գուշակ էր ու դա էլ էր մեզ խանգարում, որ ինքը չէր թողում իմ աղջիկը իմանար, որ ինքը թերի լսող է, քանի որ իր պատվի հետ էինք խաղում, իր անվան հետ էինք խաղում, ու դա մեր համար, իմ երեխայի համար մեծ խոչընդոտ էր։
I also want to say that my mother-in-law was a fortune teller and a famous fortune teller in Armenia, and she didn't allow my kid even to know herself that she has these problems, and she didn't allow this problem to get known by others because she thought that it's going to influence her fame and authority.
Տղայի համար ասեմ, որ տղաս 3 տարի շարունակ մնաց իր հոր մոտ ու երբ որ եկել էր իմ մոտ, չէր էլ պատկերացնում, որ ես կկարողանամ աշխատել, ես կկարողանամ իրենց պահել, ես կկարողանամ իրենց ապագան, դպրոցը, ամեն ինչը միայնակ հոգ տանեմ ու եւ հոգեբանորեն էր իմ տղաս ավելի շատ ընկճված, քանի որ չէր թողում դրսում ծիծաղեինք, գլուխներս բարձր նայեինք կամ ինչ որ միտեղ գնայինք նստեինք, քանի որ ինքը ապրել էր այդ բռնության մեջ ու գիտեր, որ մենք մենակ տան համար ենք, ոչ մեկի հետ չշփվենք, քանի որ խանդում են կամ ինչ որ մի բան, տղաս երևի թե մեծ ներդրում էր, որ իմ տղաս եւս բռնարար չդարձավ, եւս չմտածեց իր հոր նման, բայց մինչեւ այդ ինքը այդ ձևով էր մտածում ու մեծանում էր նույն ձևով։
As for my son, I would like to say that he lived with his father about 3 years, and when he came to me at my place,
Anita, he was forcefully detained by his father. He was not allowed to visit his mother.
Okay, so he couldn't imagine that I could work and I could become independent and I could afford anything. Psychologically, he was very depressed, and he didn't even encourage us going out, having fun, sitting in a cafe, for example, and that we needed to do a big work. And I am really proud that we did this, and I helped him not to become an abuser himself, because he lived in that abusive relationship.
Yeah, I want to add that during the years that her son stayed with his father, Hasmik was receiving, every time she wanted to enter in contact with him, the father taught the son, curse her, to say bad things to his mother, and really develop in him this abuser behavior. And the center worked with the child psychologist many years with her son to rehabilitate him and to help him, put him on the right path, and create and recreate the bond between mother and son.
Ես նաև ուզում եմ ավելացնել, որ այդ ընթացքում Հասմիկը բազմիցս փորձել է կապ հաստատել որդու հետ, բայց հայրը չի թողնելու ժամանակ էլ փորձել է պատ բառեր սովորացնել, հայհոյանքներ սովորացնել, որ երեխան հայհոյի մորը, եւ ձևավորել այսպիսով բռնարարին վայել վարքագիծ։ Եվ մեր կենտրոնի մանկան հոգեբանը երկար ժամանակ է աշխատել երեխայի հետ, որպեսզի կարողանա ճիշտ ուղու վրա բերի, երեխային ճիշտ վարքագծի բերի։
Yeah. So Hasmik, go ahead.
Այդ սկզբնական շրջանում ես չէի հավատում, որ իմ տղան կփոխվի, բայց հիմա որ խոսում ենք, ամեն մի դեպքը արդեն ծիծաղելով ենք հիշում այդ ամենի, քանի որ շատ դժվար էր։ Ինձ տղայիս ասել էին, որ քո մաման կանանց աջակցման կենտրոնի հետ կազմակերպության հետ երեխաներին տանում են, վաճառում են կամ տանում են մորթում ուտում են ու իմ երեխան այդ վախով ապրում էր։ Հիմա դա մեծ հաղթանակ էր, որ իմ երեխաները դուրս եկան այդ իրավիճակից ու տեսան իրական կյանքն ու ապրելը։
At the first time, I didn't believe that we're going to overcome this, to handle this. But now when we remember this with my kids, we start laughing. And they were told, my son was even told that with Women's Support Center, we were selling kids, or we were even eating kids. But I think that was a victory, that we worked together. And so we managed to take my kids out of that abusive situation. That's a true victory.
Zela, maybe you can go to another question.
Yes. There's a good follow-up question. Is the abuser in jail right now? And if yes, how many years did he get?
Well, the abuser was a very abusive and very violent individual. He was not put in jail because of domestic violence, but he was he was put in jail for 3 months because he tried to burn the parental household. And then he went to France, and there he beat a policeman, and he was extradited. He came to Armenia, and for another incident, he was jailed. So he was overall a very violent individual.
Is he still in jail right now?
Hasmik ամուսինը տեր բանի մեջ է գալանավորված է. Yeah, he's in jail now.
Քանի տարի?
Չգիտեմ, տեղյակ չեմ։
We don't know.
Wow.
I don't know, yeah.
We have another question, but I have a personal question for Hasmik. How are you making a livelihood right now? It looks like you're still doing cooking, and you have an Instagram post or something that we can feature you on the AIWA website, maybe. So.
Հասմիկ, մի անձնական հարց, ինչով ես հիմա զբաղվում, ինչով ես քեզ ապահովում երեխաներին, էլի թխելով զբաղվում ես, Instagram-յան էջ ունես, ինչ որ էջ, որտեղ մենք կարող ենք հետևել քեզ, օգտակար լինել, աջակցել։
Այս պահին չէ, էլ չեմ թխում, խմորեղեններ չեմ սարքում, քանի որ մի քիչ ընտանեկան դժվարություն եղավ ու պապայիս կորցնելուց հետո ոնց որ փոխեցի գործես ու հիմա այս պահին աշխատում եմ երկու տեղ ու Instagram-յան էջ ունեմ։
Right now, I'm not baking anymore because I experienced some family difficulties and issues. And after losing my father, I changed my work, and now I work in 2 different places. Yes, I have social media profiles and pages.
Wonderful. One more question, and maybe this is for Maro. Where can we find more information about your center? Has there been a surge in such cases after the war because of PTSD of the soldiers? And do you have any experience in this area?
Well, first of all, you can visit our website, womensupportcenter.org, and you can see our accomplishments. We have really a very under resources. You can see publications that we have put out really to help at the institutional level, Armenia. If you have individuals that you want to refer persons that you know, we have a hotline number. You can refer people there. Our lawyers, family law, criminal law are very experienced. I don't know of any other lawyers in the country that are specialized for domestic violence. So I suggest that you refer to one of the centers. And regarding the post-war situation, as we know, displacement and conflict are triggers for domestic violence. And it's very interesting because in Karabakh, there were no laws for protecting of domestic violence laws or protection of women who were abused. And many of the women really thought that their husbands are fighting to protect them, are defending them. And it's a shame to go and report their partners to the police. So it was very much a taboo issue. However, when they came to Armenia and they understood that there are laws to protect them, more and more women now are coming out, and but it's very difficult. I mean, we have had cases of women from Artsakh, but it's very difficult because they live in precarious conditions, in the not stable living conditions, and the unknown for them, what will happen to them, it's very difficult. I mean, especially now they live in an with extended members of the family that they have to take care of and all that. So it's much more difficult for them to come out of these situations. But nevertheless, we inform the communities and the local, in the regions, the support centers, they also come out on TV and they inform the population at large about services that we can offer.
If I can just add a couple of words to what Maro said, following the 2020 war, we saw in the initial phase, there's the emergency phase, so not very many cases are reported, but then there's a sort of trickling of cases over time. And during that time, we also did outreach and workshops. The same thing happened in 2023 after the forced displacement. That initial period of a few months, 3 to 6 months, we had a few cases, up to, I think, 30 between September and December. But now we're starting to see a growing number of cases because people are more settled. They've perhaps dealt with their other urgent issues like finding employment. And now they're starting to question, the domestic violence and whether they can come out. We've had a lot of hotline calls where women are just simply from Artsakh looking for information because they're not yet ready to break the cycle of violence. We've had a number of these cases where they say, their husbands, their sons fought in the war, so they need to be the ones to sort of support the family. They can't leave their husbands, and so on. So there's an immense amount of guilt around that right now. There are also families that largely have many children and not a lot of financial means. A lot of them are financially dependent on their husbands. So these create a lot of barriers to reporting violence, but we are still seeing a number of growing cases. But I wanted to point out that we had a surge in cases around 2020, but we can't necessarily tease apart all of the various factors because there were so many changes at the same time. We had COVID and we had war in 2020. We also had an improved police response over that period of time. In 2018, as Maro said, we finally had in place the domestic violence law, so more people were coming out for support. And by 2020, there was a growing number of women coming to us because of the law, because of the police response, and also because of the growing awareness. And adding to that COVID, war, and so on. There were so many factors at play here, but we know for certain that war and conflict has definitely played a part in our growing numbers as well.
Yeah, there are a few legal related questions coming up. The bar, I guess we have a few people from the Armenian Bar Association. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. I guess, Maro and Ani, can you briefly touch on the recent changes to this law? And there were a couple of other questions about the legal firms that are taking on some of these cases. And is there a way to work on these remotely? That's another question I had earlier. Sorry, a lot of legal questions here.
Maro, do you want to take the question, or should I?
Well, why don't you go over, the recent changes to the law and the improvements, and then maybe we can wrap it up that way. What the role of the Women's Support Center on that?
So when the domestic violence law was first adopted in 2017, it had a number of issues with it. First of all, there was a great focus on reconciliation, meaning that they were pushing for the victim and the perpetrator to reconcile and come to terms, rather than focusing on victim safety and perpetrator accountability. So that and that was even reflected in the title of the law at the time. In 2024, by July of 2024, when the new amendments were adopted and put into force, a lot of significant changes have come about from that. One is that we have stronger definitions around every form of domestic violence. Another is that we have more protections for victims. For instance, free of charge medical care for all registered victims is now something under the law. Another really important piece is that intimate partner violence is now defined under the law. So prior to 2024, if a woman was in an intimate partner relationship prior to marriage, if they're in an unregistered marriage, a common law marriage, which is very common here in Armenia, or if they're, let's say, a member of the LGBT community, they have a partner, these people could not be registered as victims of domestic violence under the Armenian law, and now they can. So that's very significant. The other thing also is that children who are witness to domestic violence are now recognized as themselves victims of domestic violence, now under the new amendments. I won't go into a lot of the more nitty gritty, but just I'll say that sanctions for perpetrators have been now strengthened. And for anyone interested, including the Armenian Bar Association, we can send you a very detailed sort of account of all of those changes, if that's interesting for you. Oh, one thing I should mention that's very important is stalking was criminalized also.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. That's very nice summary. Maro, Ani, any final question? A bunch of legal questions here. I don't know. I suggest folks get in touch with Maro and Ani through the Women's Support Center website at this point. Any concluding remarks, Maro, before we close?
Well, I think just looking at the questions, domestic violence is a global problem. The difference with Armenia is that it's just recently Armenia dealt with this issue, whereas in countries that are much more established with their support system, police response, professionals of the first responders, we still have a long way to go. We still have to train a lot of policemen. We have to train judges and prosecutors and investigators, forensic examiners. There's so many areas that we have to address in order to have a robust response to combating domestic violence. Teachers that need to report such cases, health professionals, healthcare workers, all this, it's really a community engagement. And we're doing incremental steps of improvement, but there's still a long way to go. I have to say that we come a long way, though, from 2010 when we started work, from 2018 when the law first came into place. But there is still a long way to go forward. Of course, nothing like this can change. I mean, no legislation, no police response, if there is in the society a change in its patriarchal values. If society considers women as second-rate citizens, and the inequality is persistent at all levels, when they see women with less dignity and less value than men, that's when we cannot have progress. So it's very important that tremendous work has to be done at many, many levels. And I have to say that I'm very thankful for the present government that is very much cooperative, and we're trying, I mean, yes, sometimes they think in a box. Sometimes they're very square in their approach, but nevertheless, we can make little differences, and they're much more cooperative and much more supportive of us, and they rely on us. Whenever they come up with a new idea, with a new document or a new piece of legislation or a new procedure, they consult with us. And this is something very important, that we can help in the progress in this area.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody. Really, I want to thank everybody, all our panelists. Ani Kojoyan, thank you for your amazing translation skills. You did a wonderful job. Thank you, Hasmik. Shnoragalachun, Hasmik. And please look out for future AIWA events. Follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and be healthy, be safe, and look out for future events. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Շնորհակալ ենք, հաջողություն։
Շնորհակալ ենք, Հասմիկ, իրավ ջան, bye-bye.